Hey there, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments.
My parents always claimed they were old school, like that was supposed to excuse half the crap they pulled over the years, like it was some badge of honor to be emotionally tone deaf and financially selective. They liked to pretend they were the tough love kind, the ones who don't sugarcoat reality, but really it was just a mask for their favoritism and their fear of admitting they'd made a mess of raising two very different kids. I was 17 when I sat down at the kitchen table with a folder full of college brochures, a scholarship application half filled, and a dumb little hope burning in my chest that they'd be proud, or at least willing to talk. It was a Saturday morning, and I had woken up early just to catch them before my dad went off to his usual weekend projects, which always involved more beer than building. I remember Mom sipping her coffee, scrolling on her phone, and Dad flipping through some flyer about lawnmowers like the world outside our living room wasn't about to change completely for me. I cleared my throat, laid out the papers in front of them, and said something like, "I've been looking at schools, and I think I found a few good fits." My voice was steady, polite, not too eager because I knew better than to expect enthusiasm from them. But still, there was this flicker of something inside me, hope maybe, that they'd see I was serious, that I had plans, and maybe they'd want to be part of it. What I got was a silence so thick it felt like the oxygen got sucked out of the room. Dad looked up over the rim of his glasses, stared at the folder like it was a stack of unpaid bills, and gave me the slow headshake that made my stomach drop before he even spoke. "You're gonna have to figure that out on your own," he said, like it was some reasonable, even noble thing to say. Mom didn't even look up, just mumbled something about how she and Dad paid their own way through life, how scholarships and jobs build character, and how they weren't in a position to help right now, though funny enough, that never stopped them from eating out 3 times a week or upgrading their damn entertainment system every other year. I sat there blinking at them, trying to process the bluntness of it all. It wasn't just the words, it was the way they were delivered. Like I was foolish for even asking, like my education was some annoying errand they didn't want to deal with. They didn't ask what I wanted to study, didn't care which schools I had picked, didn't offer advice or encouragement. They just shut it down. One sentence, like a door slamming. I didn't cry, not then. I think I just nodded and quietly started stacking my papers again, all while this cold, heavy rock started forming in my chest. The worst part? They went back to their routine like nothing happened. My mom got up to put laundry in, humming like she hadn't just told her daughter she was completely on her own. My dad flipped the page in his flyer and muttered something about interest rates. That was the moment something in me cracked. Not snapped, not yet, but cracked in that subtle, dangerous way that doesn't show until years later when the damage has spread too far to patch. And then, just like salt in a wound, it happened. 2 months later, Dylan, my baby brother, the golden child who couldn't pass algebra without a tutor and who never did a chore without being paid, turned 16. We were barely scraping by, or so I'd been told when I asked about tuition, but somehow they rolled up to the driveway that afternoon with a brand new truck, shiny red, bow on top, the kind of thing kids post about on Instagram with captions like "best parents ever." I watched the whole thing from my bedroom window, blinds barely tilted, heart pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. Dad handed him the keys like they were passing down a family legacy, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. Mom was crying, actual tears, talking about how proud they were that he'd stayed out of trouble and kept his grades up enough to pass. Enough to pass. That was the bar. Meanwhile, I had a part-time job, a 4.0 GPA, volunteer hours, and a full application for an out-of-state university sitting in a drawer because apparently none of that was worth a goddamn dime. I didn't come downstairs. I didn't say congratulations. I just stood there in silence, staring at my reflection in the window, trying to memorize that feeling, the exact flavor of betrayal. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was emptiness. A quiet realization that I didn't matter to them in the way I thought I did. Not in the way Dylan did. Maybe not at all. That night they had a cookout to celebrate. Neighbors came over, music played. Dylan was already posting pictures of his truck with hashtags about grind mode and blessed. I lay in bed, earphones in, eyes open. I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I started planning. Because if they weren't going to invest in me, I'd become someone they didn't deserve to know. I didn't want revenge that night. I just wanted to disappear. And slowly I did. But the best part? They didn't even notice. There's a kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It's not the kind that gives you time to think or breathe or heal, but the kind that wraps itself around your throat like a tightening rope, slowly choking the words and hope and resentment out of you until all you're left with is a numb routine of pretending not to care. That's the silence I lived in for the rest of my senior year after that talk at the kitchen table and the truck-shaped slap in the face that followed. I didn't bring up college again, not to them anyway, because what was the point of repeating a conversation that had already been declared over before it began? Instead, I started carrying this invisible brick of resentment with me everywhere. On the bus to school, in the locker room between classes, during long shifts at the diner down on River Road, where I scrubbed dishes until my knuckles cracked and bled through latex gloves that didn't fit right. I worked every damn hour they'd give me, taking doubles when someone called out, walking home past midnight more times than I could count, stashing every tip, no matter how small, into an old shoebox under my bed like it was the only lifeline I had. I didn't tell anyone at school what was going on. I smiled when teachers asked about plans. I nodded when friends assumed I'd be going somewhere big, somewhere far. I let them believe I had the kind of parents who showed up to award ceremonies and filled out FAFSA forms and posted "so proud of my baby girl" captions under graduation photos. But every form I filled out, every deadline I met, every email I sent to financial aid offices across the country, I did alone, hunched over a secondhand laptop that overheated if I opened more than 2 tabs at once. And through all of that, while I balanced grades and shifts and applications and exhaustion, my parents kept floating through life like I was just another piece of furniture in the background. Dylan wrecked his truck 6 weeks after he got it, rear-ended someone while texting, and they didn't even yell. Dad just called it a learning experience. And Mom cried again, but this time it was because she thought the insurance wouldn't cover cosmetic damage. They paid the deductible without blinking, got him a rental, and told the story at Sunday dinners like it was some quirky family anecdote, instead of a testament to how little they expected from him and how much they were willing to give. I made my decision in March. I got an acceptance letter, full scholarship, out of state, not a penny needed from home, and I read it sitting in the high school parking lot under that busted streetlight that flickered like a dying firefly. It should have been a victory. It should have felt like a weightlifting, but instead it just made me furious, because the only reason I was free was because they let me go without a fight. I didn't tell them, not right away. I waited. I wanted to see if they'd ask, if they even remembered application deadlines or graduation dates, or that I was supposed to go somewhere in the fall. They didn't, not once. No curiosity, no support. Just the usual half nods and muttered, "How's school?" when they remembered I existed. I packed my bags 3 days before move-in. Quietly, efficiently. I had my acceptance packet tucked into my backpack, my dorm address saved on my phone, and a rideshare scheduled for 5:45 a.m. on a Saturday morning when I knew the house would be dead silent. I had rehearsed the goodbye in my head. Something short, something clean, something polite like, "Thanks for everything." But when the moment came, I didn't bother. I stood at the front door for maybe 10 seconds, keys in hand, looking around that living room with its dated wallpaper and the dented coffee table Dylan had ruined during a PlayStation rage fit, and I realized there was nothing left to say. No part of that house had ever really been mine, not even my room, which I knew would be turned into Dylan's second gaming den the second I left. So I didn't knock on their bedroom door, I didn't leave a letter, I didn't cry in the back of the car or look out the window like some sad movie character hoping someone would come running after me. I just left, like I'd never been there in the first place. The sun was barely up, the street was quiet. My driver didn't ask questions, and as we pulled away, I didn't look back. because you only look back when you think someone might miss you. College was hard, not in the I can't handle the workload way, but in the I can't afford to get sick or I might have to skip a meal kind of way. Every dollar mattered. Every credit hour felt like a gamble. I worked campus jobs, tutoring, library shifts, weekend janitorial cleanups. I ate cafeteria leftovers. I shared textbooks with kids from similar stories. And I never, not once, called home. I didn't post pictures. I didn't send updates. I became a ghost, even as I built a life that was more real than anything I'd known before. They didn't reach out. Not that first semester, not the second. I changed my number halfway through sophomore year after realizing the only calls I got were spam or classmates looking for notes. I didn't tell anyone at home, not because I was hiding, but because nobody asked. It was like I had been quietly erased. And you know what? For a while, I liked it that way. I know some people will hear that and judge. They'll say, but they're still your parents, or you should have at least tried to talk to them. And maybe they're right. Maybe I should have tried harder. Maybe I should have thrown their mistakes in their faces and demanded better. But at that time, all I wanted was space. Breathing room, a world where I could prove to myself I wasn't the problem. And the more distance I created, the clearer it became. I had never been the problem. I was just the practice round. The first holiday season away from home is supposed to feel like a bittersweet milestone, the kind that leaves you staring out of frost-covered windows with a mug of cheap cocoa in your hands, trying to pretend the ache in your chest is just homesickness and not something darker, not the slow, sinking confirmation that the place you came from was never really home to begin with. For me, Christmas didn't come with ribbons or wrapping paper or flights back to familiar rooms. It came with silence, once again, but this time, it was the kind I chose, the kind I wore like armor, and in some strange, twisted way, it finally started to feel like freedom. That December, I didn't book a ticket. I didn't ask for time off to fly back. I didn't even check the bus schedule. I told my professors I'd be staying on campus for winter break, which wasn't technically allowed, but I'd lined up a temporary job at the campus cafeteria, and the housing office let me stay in the dorms under the excuse that I was working support for incoming spring students. The truth was, I just didn't want to go back. Not to the house, not to the cold stares, not to the fake smiles I'd have to force in front of extended family members who couldn't even remember my major. I wasn't interested in pretending to be someone they could be proud of when they hadn't even noticed I was gone. But it wasn't entirely bleak. My roommate, Claire, one of those effortlessly warm people who somehow manages to keep plants alive and always remembers to ask how your day was, invited me to her family's Christmas instead. I had tried to decline at first, out of habit more than pride, telling her I didn't want to intrude, that I had plans to catch up on reading and maybe treat myself to some sleep. But she saw right through it, like she always did. And the next thing I knew, I was riding shotgun in her dad's dusty old SUV, surrounded by grocery bags and gift-wrapped boxes, heading toward a place that didn't belong to me but somehow already felt more welcoming than the house I grew up in. Her family lived in a modest 2-story colonial outside of Asheville. White shutters, fireplace that actually worked, mismatched ornaments on the tree that clearly held memories, not just aesthetics. Her mom hugged me like we'd met before, like I was someone who belonged in their family photo. Her little brother offered me the last cinnamon roll without even being asked. And when Christmas morning came, there was a stocking with my name on it, handwritten in marker, slightly crooked, stuffed with tiny things like lip balm and candy canes and a $5 Starbucks card. Things that didn't cost much but screamed one deafening message. We thought of you. I hadn't realized how much I needed that. Meanwhile, back home, the only updates I got were through social media, because of course, despite the total lack of contact, my mother still kept me on her Facebook friends list. I watched in real time as she posted photos of the perfect Christmas morning, complete with a fully decorated tree, a mountain of gifts, and my brother front and center, grinning next to yet another new gadget. Something big and expensive that I couldn't identify from the angle, but sure as hell wasn't bought from a bargain bin. The caption read, "So proud of our boy, he's come so far." And that's what did it. Not the gifts, not the fake smiles, but the lie, the delusion that he was the one who had come far, when in reality he was still living at home, barely hanging on to a part-time job at a tire shop, while I was scraping together every ounce of strength I had just to stay afloat in a world they refused to believe I belonged to. That post, in its glossy, hollow perfection, hit harder than any insult ever could. I didn't comment, I didn't like it, I didn't message her to ask why she hadn't texted me all month. Instead, I logged off, closed my laptop, and went back downstairs to help Claire's mom with the dishes. And when she looked at me with a soft, sincere smile and said, "You've got a good head on your shoulders, honey," I nearly broke down right there with my hands in the soapy sink water, because no one back home had said something like that to me in years, maybe ever. Spring semester came and went in a blur of essays, shifts, and cold nights spent under 2 blankets in a drafty dorm room that still felt more like sanctuary than anything my childhood ever offered. I got promoted at my campus job. I was selected to be a mentor for incoming freshmen. I submitted an essay to a national competition and placed in the top 10. And yet, through all of it, the phone stayed silent. No calls, no emails, no birthday card that March. Not even a thumbs up on the one photo I posted of myself holding an academic award, standing next to my department head, beaming like I'd won the damn lottery. I didn't expect celebration, but I had secretly hoped for acknowledgement. A crack in the ice, something. Instead, I got nothing, and still, through all of that, my brother continued to crash and burn in slow motion. Word got around through mutual friends back home that he dropped out of community college after barely a semester, citing mental burnout, which was just code for couldn't be bothered. He spent his days working at the same gas station where half of our graduating class rotated through when they needed quick cash. But the narrative at home? Oh, it was all about how he's figuring things out and he's taking time to find his path. I was doing everything, fighting every battle alone, and somehow I was still the invisible one. And yet I didn't reach out, not to correct them, not to ask why, not to beg for credit. Because the truth was, I had finally started to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Control. I was the one deciding the terms now. I was the one drawing the lines. And for the first time, I wasn't shrinking myself to fit into a picture they had already framed without me. I wasn't just gone. I was rebuilding. Graduation had always seemed like a mirage on the distant horizon, one of those abstract goals people talk about in vague, dreamy tones, as if reaching it would somehow validate the years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the ramen dinners, the side hustles, and the quiet ache of fighting battles no one clapped for. But as it finally approached, no longer a concept but an actual date on the calendar marked with a black Sharpie, I found myself staring at it with a mixture of exhaustion, defiance, and something bordering on disbelief. Because part of me had stopped believing I'd ever make it to that finish line. At least not like this. Not with my dignity intact and my name on the honors list. By the time May rolled around, I had become an expert at compartmentalizing, at bearing the bitterness under layers of routine, at folding the jagged edges of my resentment into the structured corners of my color-coded planner, at pretending the silence from home was just background noise instead of a daily pulsing reminder of the love I never received. My cap and gown arrived in a flimsy cardboard box with creased edges and a shipping label that spelled my name right, something my mother hadn't done in years. And I stood in my tiny off-campus apartment, holding the fabric in my hands like it was some sacred relic from a version of my life that had never quite felt real. I had made it. I had paid for every class, passed every test, earned every credit. And not once had anyone from my family so much as asked what I was majoring in. The ceremony was scheduled for the 3rd Saturday of the month, an outdoor event early in the morning with limited seating and a strict guest list policy that required all attendees to be registered in advance for security and capacity reasons. I received the notification email weeks in advance, asking for the names of my guests, along with their contact info, ID numbers, and relationship to the graduate. I stared at the screen for a long time, cursor blinking in the empty fields, a blank form that felt like an accusation. I thought about writing "no guests attending." I thought about filling in Claire's parents' names, but then a darker idea crept in. One I didn't even realize I was entertaining until it was fully formed, sharp and deliberate, and absolutely satisfying. I submitted the form with no names, no mom, no dad, no brother, no reserved seats. If they wanted to come, they'd have to figure it out on their own. I didn't post about the date on social media. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't send an invitation. I simply kept it to myself, carried the knowledge quietly, like a loaded weapon I had no intention of firing unless provoked. Part of me wasn't sure they'd even try to come, not after 4 years of silence, not after birthdays missed and achievements ignored. But there was also this persistent, intrusive thought that they might appear, not because they cared, but because they wanted to be seen caring, to save face, to prove to some imaginary audience that they had been there all along. And I was right. They showed up. I saw them from a distance, standing near the administration tent, squinting at the map printed on the back of the program, like tourists trying to find a landmark in a city they barely remembered visiting. My mother had curled her hair and was wearing a pastel dress 2 sizes too tight, her lips painted in that shade of pink she used to wear when she still hosted Tupperware parties and pretended we were a normal, happy family. My father wore the same windbreaker he'd had for 10 years, faded jeans, and that tired expression he always carried whenever he was forced to attend something that didn't directly involve him. They looked lost, truly lost, and for once, I didn't feel guilty about it. I watched as they approached one of the event staff members, holding up their phones, showing pictures, asking where they could find me. They didn't know where I was seated. They didn't know my department. They didn't even know my major. The staff member, a polite junior volunteer with a clipboard and a fake smile, glanced at their names, checked the list, and shook her head. "I'm sorry," she said, loud enough for me to hear even from several yards away. "There's no guest reservation under that name. Are you sure you're in the right place?" My mother looked confused. My father looked irritated. They huddled together, whispered something, and then wandered off toward the general admission seating, like people trying to sneak into a wedding they weren't invited to. And they weren't. Not really, because this moment, this milestone, this triumph, it wasn't for them. It never had been. When my name was called, loud and clear, mispronounced slightly but still recognizable, I stood tall, walked across that stage, and took my diploma from the dean with a steady hand and a small, satisfied smile. The applause was loud, scattered, meaningless in the way most crowd noises are, but I didn't look toward the seats. I didn't search for familiar faces. I didn't need to. After the ceremony, while students posed for photos and families passed around bouquets and balloons, I slipped away. I didn't linger. I didn't wait for them to find me. I had already arranged for Claire to meet me by the side entrance with her car idling, bags packed, ready to go. No fanfare, no awkward conversations, no forced hugs or passive-aggressive questions about what I planned to do next. Just a clean break. Later that evening, long after I'd left campus behind, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, clearly one of theirs. It said, "We were there. Wish we could have talked. Proud of you." I read it twice, then blocked the number without responding, because 4 years ago, I had left without saying goodbye. And now they didn't even know how to say hello. It's strange how the end of something never really feels like an end, at least not in the grand cinematic way we're trained to expect. Not with swelling music or slow motion hugs or people running down airport terminals in tears. It just sort of stops, like a faucet being shut off midstream, leaving a drip that you only hear when the silence gets deep enough. That's how graduation felt, and that's how everything that came after began to unfold. Quietly, deliberately, and without the kind of closure I thought I might, on some irrational level, still crave. But closure isn't something you get from the people who never showed up for the beginning. It's something you give yourself when you finally realize you're done begging for it. In the weeks following graduation, as the campus emptied out and friends dispersed to new jobs, new cities, new lives, I settled into a rhythm that felt foreign but earned. I had accepted a job offer months before, something that paid decently and offered relocation. And while it wasn't the dream position, it was stable, respectable, and far, far away from the town I had spent the better part of my life trying to outrun. I packed my things with clinical efficiency, discarding what I no longer needed, both physically and emotionally. And when I turned the key in the ignition of my used Honda, bought with years of scrubbing tables and tutoring students whose parents actually remembered their birthdays, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I had done enough looking back to last a lifetime. The new city was loud and anonymous in all the best ways. No one knew who I was, and more importantly, no one cared. I walked to work, made my own schedule, built routines around early morning coffee runs and late-night walks past lit-up apartment buildings, each window offering a glimpse into someone else's version of peace or chaos. I began to understand the beauty of being unknown, of not carrying someone else's version of me on my shoulders every time I entered a room. For the first time, I felt light, not euphoric, not naive, but genuinely untethered. My job, a project coordinator position at a nonprofit, gave me enough mental challenge to stay sharp and enough emotional distance to avoid drowning in other people's expectations. I got used to being the girl who figured things out, the one people came to when spreadsheets broke or timelines slipped, and while none of them knew about the battles I'd fought to get there, I didn't mind. My story was no longer a performance. It was mine to tell, or not. Months passed, then a year. I heard nothing, no calls, no letters, no surprise visits. Occasionally, I'd check my old social media accounts just to see if anyone had noticed the absence, but it was always the same. Photos of my brother, still clinging to whatever scraps of validation my parents could piece together for him, still the center of their lopsided universe. One post showed him holding a certificate of attendance from a weekend seminar, grinning like he'd cured cancer, and beneath it, my mother had written, "Our boy is going places." I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't even feel pity. I felt distance, a wide, canyon-sized gap that could never be crossed, not because I wouldn't build the bridge, but because they never knew how to walk it. Then 2 years later, the message came. It wasn't from them directly, not at first, but from a woman I didn't recognize, someone with a generic name and a profile picture of a sunset. She had sent me a private message on LinkedIn, of all places, saying, "Hi, I met your parents at a local event. They mentioned you lived in the area. They're hoping to reconnect. Would you be open to meeting for coffee?" Just like that. No context. No explanation for the years of silence. No apology, just a casual attempt to re-enter my life as if they hadn't missed every major milestone since I left that house without a goodbye. I stared at the message for a long time, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what I wasn't going to say. I wasn't going to explain where I'd been. I wasn't going to list my accomplishments. I wasn't going to ask why it took them this long to care. Instead, I did the one thing I taught myself to do whenever the past came clawing at my new life. I hit delete. Because here's the thing people don't tell you about healing. It's not loud. It doesn't always come with confrontation or speeches or dramatic walkouts. Sometimes healing is just silence that you choose. It's the rejection of chaos. The quiet refusal to reopen doors that only ever led to rooms filled with echoes. It's choosing peace over understanding, distance over resentment, yourself over them. There was no reunion, no coffee, no awkward conversation where I pretended to be okay just to make them feel better. There was no photo of me in a cap and gown on their mantle, no frame with my diploma hanging in the hallway, no reminder that their daughter had become something despite their absence. And that, I realized, was the most powerful revenge I could ever ask for. Because while they clung to a version of me that was incomplete, unfinished, maybe even disappointing in their eyes, I had gone out and built a life so full, so rich with earned moments and quiet victories, that their opinion no longer held weight. I didn't need their applause. I had given myself the ovation. And yet, late at night, when the city quieted and the only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the occasional clink of pipes behind my apartment walls, I sometimes wondered, not with longing, but with curiosity, if they had any idea what they had lost. Not just a daughter, but the chance to know her, to know who she became, to know what she carried, and more importantly, what she left behind. But they'd never know, because I made damn sure they missed it. Every milestone, every moment, every version of the daughter they never bothered to see.